Hey guys, Taki here. If you're a Steam Deck owner and you like the device but you wish it had a better screen, I've got a product that might be a good option. This is the DeckHD mod, and it promises to upgrade our 800p screen to a 1200p one while also drastically improving the picture quality. In this in-depth video, I'm going to go over everything that you need to know if you're considering this mod for yourself. Inside the box, they've included all of the tools that you'll need for this mod. We have a new ribbon cable for the display, some adhesive strips, a bunch of useful pry tools to help with the disassembly, and a decent suction cup. Based on my experience with the clear shell mod, this should be a huge upgrade since the top part is reinforced. And we also have a decent screwdriver. But here's the star of the show, our new 1200p panel. More on this in just a bit. For this mod, I'm going to use my Atomic Purple Steam Deck. If you haven't seen the video on this case, it's linked in the corner of the screen. In that video, I stated that I would eventually change this deck to an all-white shell, and I still plan to do that. Since I knew I wouldn't keep this purple shell long-term, I did something that makes this current mod super easy to do. I did not reapply any adhesive to my old screen when I installed it in this case. There is just enough remaining adhesive to keep this thing from falling out, but I should be able to remove it in just a few seconds with a suction cup. However, I still need to check. I am dying to see how this screen looks, so let's start with the installation process by powering off the device and taking off the back shell. As with almost all of my build videos, I have some help for this. Now that we have the back shell off, it's time to go over the plan. As I suspected, the screen is already coming loose on the other side, so I'm going to have an easier time doing this mod than other people. There are still some shortcuts that you can take to make this easier on yourself, and I would say it's not as bad as doing a full shell swap. If you're going to do this mod, it would be a good idea to mix and match some other mods that are available to save yourself some time. Good candidates would be a Hall stick change, a heatsink mod, or a full shell replacement. Basically, I'm going to try to keep as many things in place as possible so I don't have to waste a bunch of time putting this back together. If you were doing this from stock, you should disconnect the motherboard completely from your unit while you remove the screen, but I'm just going to set it off to the side with the fan attached. I don't know if the stock display connector is pin to pin with this new mod, so I'm going to take that off and use the one from the kit. Just be careful not to rip the ribbon cable when you remove it. This would be the point where you would need to use a heat gun or a blow dryer to remove the stock screen. If you have access to a bigger suction cup that can lock in place, you'll have an easier time removing the stock adhesive. I just need to poke the panel through this hole and the entire thing will come out. Here's a closer look at how I left things for my full shell mod. If you're planning to do this mod, it might be a good idea not to reapply new adhesive to this new panel until you know for sure that you will keep it installed. My metal frame should have just enough remaining stock adhesive to keep this new panel in place for this video. Here's a look at the new screen versus the stock one. The only difference that I'm seeing is that they didn't apply graphite or copper film to the main portion of the panel. This is usually done to help spread out the heat from the side, so it will be interesting to see if this one runs hotter than stock. The film is cheap, so I could do that mod myself if I wanted. Now it's time to put this all back together. I'm going to place my deck on something in the middle to keep the screen from falling out while I do this installation. The only point of failure here is the ribbon cable connection, so make sure that it is fully seated before you screw in the PCB. After all of that, the entire thing was pretty painless. If you're coming from a stock deck that has never been touched, you should be able to do this entire thing in under an hour if you have a very good suction cup. If you don't care about the stock screen at all, you can probably get this done in about 30 minutes. I've got everything assembled, so now it's time for the moment of truth. This process might look slightly different for you when you do it, but my screen booted up into this mess. They have a full installation guide on their website, but all you're doing is essentially flashing a modified BIOS to your device that is capable of correctly driving this new screen. You know that you're all done when you see the new boot screen. So this is my finished device, and I want to go over some things that I had to deal with during this process. If we go down to the BIOS version, you can see that I'm on 1.16. This device came with a rare BIOS version that I haven't heard much about. It had version 1.14, which DeckHD does not support. I found that out after I already did the entire screen installation, and I wasn't about to tear down my other decks to do this mod. I was able to update to a newer BIOS by using the main channel for the operating system, which I never do. That was the only one that allowed me to update from 1.1.4 when I did this mod. I also needed to fix the scaling, but they have good directions on how to do that. You can leave it as is, but the UI looks weird to me being so small, so I've cranked this up all the way to make it look like it does with the 800p screen. The overlay is going to be smaller than normal, but there's a workaround for that they should probably include to their install guide because it also looks too small to me. On paper, there are two main benefits to this screen. One of them is the higher resolution, and the other is the advertised improvement to color accuracy and other panel metrics. I want to work on those one by one to keep things organized. As an added note, you're going to need to come into the game settings and change the resolution to 1200p for any game that you want to be able to play at a higher resolution. I found this to be a little annoying, but it's easy to do on a case-by-case basis. The video that you're watching now was recorded on July 3rd. I actually finished filming the entire video on that date, but I was left unimpressed with the DeckHD screen because it was way too blue. It turns out that they had another panel that was less blue that was supposed to be used for review units. I still don't know how this blue one made it into that batch, but over the last month or so, I went through a bunch of different panel configurations from the team while they worked out how to properly tune this panel for accuracy. Since this section focuses specifically on color accuracy and color comparisons with the stock deck, I opted to refilm this entire section with the retail panel configuration that they plan to use. If you guys don't know, I have two other Steam Decks. One of them was a scalped unit that came from around the launch period, and the other came directly from Valve around 7 months later. The panels are slightly different from each other, but they are more or less the same in terms of color and brightness. Because of that, I'm only going to use one of them to compare against DeckHD, but I did want to just show them side by side so you can see for yourself. I validated that they are within a margin of error from each other with benchmark data. They also match the display in the third deck that I bought for the shell replacement video, and that was produced way later than these. So with that out of the way, we're going to take away this one. On top, we have our stock screen as our baseline. I also wanted to get a known good screen for comparison, and for that we have the Logitech G Cloud. I picked this because it has 94.6% sRGB coverage with about the same color temperature and max brightness as the deck. It does have a significantly higher contrast ratio, so it's a great panel to see how DeckHD stacks up. This is going to be our baseline for what a good screen that's calibrated well should look like. This time around, I added some other titles to this test, and our first one is Donkey Kong Country 1. As you can see, these screens don't really look that similar. The first thing that I want to point out that I'm seeing is the difference in the greens. The green textures on the DeckHD screen appear to be more saturated than they do on the stock deck, especially if you look at this plant compared to this one. It's much better. I'm also seeing that reds seem to be more saturated on the new panel. You can see this if you look at Diddy Kong's hat. The same thing can be said for the dirt. You'll see one of the biggest differences if you look up at the sky texture. I can see some purple tones as I get closer to the top on DeckHD, but those tones are blue on stock. And the strange thing is that they're not supposed to look like they do on stock. This leads me to believe that DeckHD is able to display some purple colors that cannot be displayed accurately on the stock screen. And if we switch over to our known good screen, we can see that it does have the same purple tones that we're missing on the stock screen. But you'll notice that the dirt is a bit brighter. The saturation for green is still about the same. This overall scene appears to be slightly darker than it is on the G Cloud, so I would say the maximum brightness of this screen isn't as high as it is on the G Cloud or the deck itself. Our second game is another emulated title. This is Spyro Year of the Dragon, and we've already pointed out in our prior game that green textures are more saturated on the newer panel. And I think you can see that if you look at the grass texture compared to stock. Blues also seem to have a bit more saturation than they are in stock. But I think the most striking difference about this picture is the difference in the sky textures. If we look, we have a lot more going on here in the clouds versus the muted tones that are on the deck. Some of this might be due to having a higher maximum brightness, but I'm seeing way more blue in this sky when it should be mostly purple. And if we consult the G Cloud, we can see that we do have a lot of the same sky textures going on. But again, this screen appears to be a bit brighter than DeckHD. This one's kind of a bit misleading because you would think that this scene looks a lot better on DeckHD. I think that's pretty much only because this one is too bright at 100%, so I lowered it to 75% to try to match the two panels. Now the gap isn't that large. As you can probably guess, greens appear to be a bit better than they do on stock, but there is something else that is more important if you look at the logo. The outline of Let's Go Pikachu is supposed to be pure white, and we can verify that by going into Photoshop. It's hard to see in this video, but this white area is a lot warmer than it is on stock. To my eyes, the stock experience of pure white looks a lot better. I can see this in the pure white parts of the Super Mario Odyssey title screen, but it might not be easy to tell over video. Also, the stock screen is at 75% brightness in this scene. I picked this because it's almost all red, and it's easier to see the differences between how both panels treat that color. G-Cloud matches up well with DeckHD when it comes to the reds, but the color temperature is a bit better. Let's quickly go through the rest. On Doom Eternal, it appears that there's a bit more contrast in the scene on the DeckHD panel, especially when you look around the gun. I couldn't find a clear winner in Skyrim because the setting didn't have a lot of color, but I think the DeckHD screen looks a lot better than stock when we look at Witcher 3. The panel looks more vibrant with the colors that this game uses. That's enough for the static screens. I did want to include at least one game that we could look at in depth to see how the screens compare to each other. For this, I'm going to use Resident Evil 3 since it was the title that I used for most of the last month while this panel was being configured. Based on my personal opinion, this game looks a lot better on the stock screen, and that comes down to a variety of things. The most prominent are the skin tones. This might be subjective, but I think they look a lot better and more saturated than they do on DeckHD. One interesting thing about this game is that it's not super obvious that the DeckHD screen is warmer than it is on stock if you play something that is dark like this. That's why I included those other examples before this. So a couple of things that I'm seeing right away. I think the skin texture on the character looks better than they do on the modded screen. For some reason, there's more saturation, which doesn't make a lot of sense based on the other titles that we saw. Her shirt appears to be more blue than it is on DeckHD, but I think that's down to having a limited range of colors on stock. The stock screen just seems to be more flattering for this game based on what I am seeing. This is a darker game, so it's a good one to use to judge the contrast differences between the panels. If the new screen is better than stock, it should not be that significant based on what I'm seeing here. The scene appears to be more blue on the stock deck, but I think DeckHD is closer to how this scene should look in this area. When we go outside, the blue area in this night scene is a lot more pronounced than it is on DeckHD, and I should mention that this is without Vibrant Deck. Some of this is probably due to having a darker screen than stock. Let's wrap this up with a comparison of the viewing angles. This is kind of a blind test, but the screen that is less blue is DeckHD. The difference between both screens is that the stock screen tints to magenta on hard diagonals. Outside of that, I'm not seeing a big improvement over stock. The next benefit of this screen is a lot easier to judge because it's very straightforward without any subjective nature at all. The question is whether or not the APU in the deck is good enough to drive games at 1200p. To judge this, I picked a few games and I purposely did not choose very old games to demonstrate this. Our first game is Spider-Man Remastered. We will move from this in just a bit, but I want you to focus on the building in the back. The game is at 800p with no FSR. You should see that it looks pretty bad. Now let's change it to 1200p, all low settings. It should look a bit better. That improvement does come with a 15 FPS hit. Spider-Man Remastered is not a light title by any stretch of the imagination, but here we are running it on the deck at 15 watt TDP. I would not have thought this was possible before I tried it. We don't have enough power here to do a 40 Hz lock with FSR turned off, but we do have enough to do a console 30. The game has a lot of background elements and they look a lot better than they do at 800p on this device. I do want to point out that this footage was recorded with the original DeckHD screen that I got from the company. I did not re-record this section since I'm not planning to use any of this footage to make any color comparisons against the stock deck. This is all about resolution. Since we don't have a lot of power to work with on this device, let's go into the settings and set a 30 FPS limit to see if we can improve our frame times. We were never that high over 30, so this should be much better. And based on what I'm seeing here, it is a lot better. This game even runs well at a near locked 30 at night. Way better than I expected for a game of this caliber. I also went ahead and tested Elden Ring. Like Spider-Man Remastered, this game is way too demanding for a 40 Hz lock. That mode does work on this screen, but the game runs at 30 to 32 FPS, so it's pointless. Once we lock this to 30 FPS, we get a fairly smooth experience with occasional dips. This is also much better than I would have expected from this APU at 15 watt TDP. Final Fantasy 15 also runs at around the same performance at 1200p resolution. This game has heavy areas, so it's going to come down to where you are, but 25 to 30 FPS seems reasonable for this APU. I'll have more games for the ending of this video, but I purposely picked heavy titles just to show a worst case scenario with this screen. So we've talked about some subjective and objective differences between these two panels. Let's round out this section of the video with a panel benchmark so we know exactly what we're working with. Let's start with what they advertise on their website. If we scroll down to the spec comparison, we can see that they claim 87% of the sRGB gamut and that their screen is 400 nits. Those values are 67% and 400 nits on the stock deck. The gamut coverage is close to the real values, but they're doing Valve dirty by saying the Steam Deck has a 400 nit screen. I have never seen a deck with a screen that dark. Let's look at the data. Here's the stock screen, and I'm going to take the time to explain what's going on here so you are more informed as a consumer. First, we can see that we have 71.9% of the sRGB gamut. Ideally, you'd want this to be as close to 100% as possible. If we look at the picture, we can see that this panel is limited when it comes to those purple tones that we weren't seeing on this panel. If we look at the bar graph on the right, it's easier to visualize how accurate individual colors are. Ideally, you'd want this to be under 2 for every color. We can see that blue and yellow are super high, and they are high enough that you'd notice those differences by looking at the screen. As we saw with Resident Evil 3, this is a panel that shifts more towards the blue. You can see this by looking at the color shown for the actual white reading. It does, however, have a much brighter screen than 400 nits. We are just under 540 nits with my stock deck. Now we have DeckHD. Right away, you'll see that we're at 88% gamut coverage, so they are advertising within the margin of error. If we look at the delta E graph, we can see that this is a calibrated display because most of the values sit under 2. You'll also notice that they are right within the target area for magenta, which is why those purple values from magenta to blue were so accurate in the games that we tested. In fact, almost every color is within the target area. As I mentioned, this panel shifts to the reds, and we can see that by looking at the sRGB balance on the bottom. We can also see that this screen is about 100 nits lower than the stock deck, and we already saw that that was visible in the recorded footage. This value is about 75% brightness on the stock deck, so you can test that for yourself to see how it would be. We have 2 more points to go over, but they're a lot easier. When it comes to color temperature, we're at 79,000 Kelvin on the stock deck, which means that our whites will appear slightly cooler. This is around the value that I personally like. DeckHD is at 6200 Kelvin, which is significantly warmer. Finally, we have contrast ratio. This is something that isn't that great on the deck. On stock, we're around 1001, which is middle of the road territory. On DeckHD, we are at 854:1, which is largely due to having a lower maximum brightness. Our minimum value is about the same. Neither of those values is that great, so you probably won't notice the difference. If the gap was 300 to 500, you would notice it. There's another version of this configuration that did not make it to retail, but I will show you what it was like. It was a bit more blue, but the max brightness was 507 nits. The color temperature was about what it is on stock, and the contrast ratio was about the same. Still not perfect, but it was an objective improvement over the stock screen while not looking noticeably off due to the similar white point. So let's finish up this video by talking about the pricing of this and also my overall thoughts. The DeckHD upgrade comes in at around $99, which is not super cheap, but it is comparable to other replacement screens that are on the market. iFixit sells a replacement 512GB screen with slightly better tools for the same price, so that's probably what they match their screen to. Because of this, I view this screen as a decent repair alternative if you're already in a situation where you need to replace your screen. I'm just going to go over some of my subjective and objective thoughts on this after using it for about a month. First, I think the color temperature could be better than it is here. This probably comes down to the kinds of screens that you use in your daily life. I don't use many things that are this warm, so whenever I see something with a warmer screen like this, it seems out of the ordinary. If you have warmer screens in your tech devices, then the Steam Deck probably looks out of place to you. If that's the case, this would be perfect for you. If you spend a lot of time with your stock deck, then you will notice that this screen is warmer. If you only have a single deck, then you'll have to get used to it over time. I do think the higher resolution support is a cool feature in tethered situations. You won't need to gun 15 watt to play all games at 1200p, but you will for demanding ones. Even a super high-end game like Cyberpunk 2077 can run on this with low settings and no FSR. It doesn't run that great, but it runs at 25 FPS, which is good enough for Nintendo. A lot of older games from around the Half-Life 2 era to like 2015 are going to run at up to 60 FPS on this device, which is a huge improvement to get on an investment that you already made. If you don't want to use the higher resolution options, you still have the choice of running everything at 800p with the added color accuracy. All that being said, having to rely on the company to release a modified BIOS version that supports this panel kinda sucks. They hope that Valve will officially support this screen in the retail BIOS, and I could probably see that happening if this gets enough traction. If that doesn't, you'd have to hope that the company will continue to release those modified BIOS versions going forward, which is a big ask. If that didn't happen and there was no way for people in the community to do the modification on their own, you'd be left with a screen that cannot work when you update to an unsupported BIOS. I don't think that will happen, but it should be mentioned here. The panel also uses a bit more power than the stock screen. It's not a lot more power, but every little bit counts when we're stuck with a 40 watt-hour battery. Based on what I saw, it's about 0.5 watts to 1 watt of additional drain. The panel also appears to be ever so slightly warmer on the right edge where the backlight is. This isn't that noticeable, but it is something that I looked for specifically because the situation on the back of the panel. Every other aspect of this screen functions as it should, including the 40 Hz mode up to 60 Hz. If you want to buy this for yourself, I have a link down in the description. This video is a ton of work to put together, including all of the time spent on the back end working with the company to test all of the various configurations, so I do hope this was informative and helpful to you. With used decks going on sale directly from Valve, this could be a great mod to do on a cheap 64GB Steam Deck in the future. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, feel free to take a look at a video that I did on the Steam Deck case mod that I featured in this video. Happy gaming everyone, Taki out.